Welcome back to the Nostalgia Network, where we celebrate all things 70s and 80s action, sci-fi, B-movies, and pure uncut nostalgia. Picture this, gang. It is 1988. You're standing in the sci-fi section of your local video store, and you've already rented Terminator 3 times this month. Your eyes drift past the big studio releases to that bottom shelf. You know, the one with airbrush cover art, promised chrome-plated futures, and laser-scorched wastelands. Man, these weren't the movies getting Siskel and Ebert debates. These were the films that came home with you on a Friday night and the back promised a world gone mad. Well, today we're diving deep into that irradiated vault of VHS obscurity, because while everyone remembers Mad Max and the Road Warrior, Generation X was raised on a whole ecosystem of nuclear-blasted, laser-blasting, budget-challenged, post-apocalyptic fever dreams that shaped our cynical, sarcastic worldview just as much as the mainstream stuff. From Roger Corman's magnificent messes to Australian time travel mayhem funded by what appears to be a government arts grant, we're taking a chronological ride through the 5 most gloriously deranged films that'll make you question why you ever thought nuclear war would look this entertaining. Alright, let's press play.
You are condemned to Deathsport.
In the year 3000, all freedoms are crime. There is just one penalty.
Alright, gang, before we hit the 80s proper, we gotta rewind to 1978 and talk about Roger Corman's beautiful disaster, Deathsport. Because nothing says we struck gold once, so let's immediately do it again, like rushing a spiritual sequel to Death Race 2000 into production with half the budget and twice the ambition. But this time, David Carradine trades in Jason Statham's driving gloves for what can only be described as a post-apocalyptic karate-gi. And instead of weaponized cars, we get death machines, which are literally dirt bikes with clear plastic tubes glued to the side that occasionally shoot red lasers when the effect budget allows. The plot, man, Carradine and Playboy playmate Claudia Jennings are range guides. Think like a Wasteland Jedi, but with more transparent shower scenes. Who gets captured by a dystopian city-state and forced into gladiatorial combat. Here's the thing, though. Despite being a rush job that was Corman greenlit while Death Race 2000 was still in theaters, Deathsport has this fever dream quality that makes it weirdly unforgettable. I mean, sure, the pacing is slower than a Stingray bicycle through wet cement, and yeah, the action scenes are about 60% slow-motion explosives and 40% Carradine doing mystical hand gestures, but there's something hypnotic about watching a movie that thinks transparent canopies and Kawasaki motorcycles equal futuristic technology. Tragically, this was Claudia Jennings' final film. She died in a car accident shortly after filming wrapped, adding an unexpectedly somber note to an otherwise gleefully absurd exploitation flick. The production was apparently such a nightmare that Corman and director Alan Arkush, who'd go on to direct Rock and Roll High School, barely spoke by the end. But hey, if you ever wondered what happened if someone tried to make Star Wars with leftover plywood from a Sears remodel and a bunch of stunt people who really love tumbling through explosions, here it is. Deathsport is your answer.
I was there at the beginning. I saw more of how it started than anyone else alive or dead.
Remember staying up way too late on a school night, flipping through channels and stumbling onto something that looked like it escaped from a parallel dimension where Ed Wood got to make Flash Gordon? That's The Lost Planet, a 1986 made-for-TV fever dream that feels like someone watched Star Wars through a kaleidoscope while having a severe head cold. This Italian-made miniseries, later chopped down into a feature, stars a young Crispin Glover's doppelganger. Wait, no, that's actually just some random actor nobody remembers, but the vibe is pure Glover energy, as our heroes crash land on a mysterious planet that's equal parts Tatooine and whatever the production crew could build in a Roman quarry on a random Tuesday. The plot involves ancient aliens, mystical crystals, evil overlords who definitely shopped at the same costume warehouse as Ming the Merciless, and a whole lot of people running through fog machines while lasers that definitely won't line up in post-production get fired wildly off screen. What makes The Lost Planet genuinely fascinating is how aggressively Italian it feels despite trying to be a space opera. There's an operatic quality to the overacting. The dubbing is magnificently out of sync, even in the English version, and every dramatic moment is punctuated by synthesizer stabs that sound like someone discovering a Casio keyboard for the very first time. The special effects budget appears to have been roughly equivalent of what the average viewer spent on pizza for that evening, resulting in spaceships that are clearly models held by visible strings and alien planets that are definitely just Italy with a filter. Director Brett Piper, working under a pseudonym because even he knew what was happening here, somehow convinced real actors to deliver lines like they were performing Shakespeare while wearing costumes that looked like rejected designs from Buck Rogers. This one aired on UHF stations at, I would say, about 2 a.m. It got imported to VHS and cover art that promised Star Wars and delivered something closer to a community theater production of Dune. And if you managed to catch it during one of those delirious late-night channel surfing sessions, it burned itself into your brain like a half-remembered dream you're not entirely sure even happened. It was glorious.
For over 500 years, this city has been your mother. Now the city will be ours. This is not a skirmish. This is a war.
Hey, do you guys ever wonder what would happen if Australia decided to make the Terminator, but with 1/50th of the budget, and a plot that reads like someone described time travel after a 3-day fever? Welcome to the Time Guardian. It's 1987. It's Aussie's sci-fi epic that proves you can absolutely make a movie about cyborg armies and temporal warfare in the same country that gave us Mad Max. You just need to aim way, way lower and hope nobody asks too many questions. Well, here's the setup. It's in the far future, and it's the last human city, which looks suspiciously like an oil refinery with Christmas lights. Travels through time to escape an army of genocidal robots called the Jendeki. Yeah, really? And they decide 1988 Australia is the perfect place to materialize and make their stand. Why? Because the filmmakers needed to shoot on location and couldn't afford to build an actual future set. That's why. Tom Burlinson, yes, the man from Snowy River Guy, plays our hero. He's a time cop sent back to prepare the locals for a city about to appear out of thin air, which goes about as well as you'd expect when you're trying to convince 1980s Australian farmers that chrome-plated death machines are coming. The production was actually pretty ambitious for its $4 million budget. The director had worked as an editor on Mad Max 2, so he knew how to stretch a dollar, but ambition doesn't always equal execution. And what you get is a movie that desperately wants to be a thinking person sci-fi action film, but keeps tripping over its own shoelaces with pacing issues, budget constraints that turn exciting battle scenes into 5 guys in rubber suits running through smoke, and a love story with all the chemistry of a high school science fair. But here's the thing. The Time Guardian has this earnest, we're really trying here, guys, quality that's almost endearing. The miniature effects are actually pretty decent. The costume design commits fully to the chrome aesthetic, like Deathsport decided to cosplay as Blade Runner, and there's genuine craft in the cinematography, even when the script doesn't quite know what to do with itself. It's the cinematic equivalent of watching someone reach for the stars and landing in a tree. Not quite the triumph they envisioned, but you gotta respect that attempt.
Disarmament was almost complete when the bacteriological wars began. The plagues that followed slowly killed all of the men, and only a handful of females survived.
Heyo, now on to 1988's She-Wolves of the Wasteland, but this one was also released as Phoenix the Warrior, because nothing says we're not confident in our title like having at least 2 of them. And gang, this is the movie that hell comes to Frogtown watches when it wants to feel classy. Imagine a world where nuclear war has left men nearly extinct and civilization has devolved into warring tribes of Amazon warriors. Mutants who look like they raided a Spirit Halloween clearance section, and one very important pregnant woman who might be carrying the future of humanity. Now imagine all of this was shot in Southern California desert with a budget that wouldn't cover craft services on a Marvel movie. Kathleen Kinmont stars as Big. That's her character's name, Big. She's a nomadic warrior who has to protect this pregnant woman from Reverend Mother, played by Persis Khambatta from Star Trek, the motion picture, really leaning into her I need a paycheck era of acting. An evil cyborg priestess who wants the baby for nefarious purposes involving, honestly, the plot gets pretty fuzzy at that point. What you need to know is this. There are motorcycle chases. There are laser gun battles. Uncomfortable amounts of 80s workout video lingerie passing as post-apocalyptic fashion, and enough dry ice to make a Whitesnake video jealous. Director Robert Hayes, not the guy from Airplanes, different Robert Hayes, was working in the proud tradition of Roger Corman's post-nuke exploitation, where world building meant point the camera at some rocks. We're going to call that the future. The action is enthusiastic, if not exactly coherent. The practical effects are charmingly bargain bin, and there's this beautiful dissonance between the movie's feminist women rule the wasteland premise and its very male gazy execution. Critics ignored it. Box office numbers were whatever counts as numbers for a movie that premiered at drive-ins, still showing double features. But for VHS hunting Gen Xers who'd exhausted the Mad Max trilogy, She-Wolves delivers exactly what that cover promised. Leather, lasers, and ladies with really big shoulder pads fighting over the future.
Men around here. They screwed up the world once and they'll do it again.
Man, that was 5 slices of post-apocalyptic madness that your Blockbuster probably had one VHS copy of. And it was always either checked out or the tape was so degraded it looked like you were watching it through a sandstorm. These weren't the movies that got toy lines or Saturday morning cartoons, but they were the films that taught Generation X that the future was probably gonna suck. It'd definitely be filmed in a desert or a Canadian quarry, and someone would probably be wearing leather despite the apparent shortage of cows after a nuclear war. They made it work. Until next time, keep those tracking lines fuzzy and those memories crystal clear. Take care, gang.